Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Joy of Stick. Stickhead here with your Atari ST gaming channel. Now the top 50 is done and I have no idea what to do with my life now. It took up so much of my time, but yeah, in the comments I tell you what, lots of people have been including details of games that they thought should have been in the list that weren't, or games they were expecting to be in the list and weren't. And people have suggested that I should do a SNUBS video, a video of games that are mysteriously absent from the list. I mean, it's a list of 50 SD games. After all, some games have to be omitted, but you know, it's interesting to think about the reasons why they're omitted. And I was looking at the current list. There'll be a link in the description, so you can go to my website and see the entire list. If you want to play along at home, and you can have a look at the list while we're talking about it, and that might be helpful. But what I did was I went back to the first Atari SD game survey that I did. That was in 2008, so maths, 12 years ago. 12 years ago, and it's quite different. There are certain perennial games that are always going to appear on these lists from now until the end of time, but there are quite a few significant changes as well, and it's really interesting to see why. Now, there are only so many conclusions we can draw from these, looking at these and comparing these lists, because they were collated in quite different ways, really. I mean, they were similar. I asked for votes, and then I collated those votes and gave people, you know, if you voted a game at number 1, it got more points than the game at number 2, and so on. So there were similarities, but I think the real big difference is the YouTube channel that I've got now. I didn't have that when I did this before, so the vast majority, I think, of people who voted this time are people who've watched my YouTube channel. I also got votes from Atari Forum and Reddit, and where else did I get votes from? Asked for votes on my blog. Whereas in 2008 I went to Eurogamer, I went to Atari Age, so you know, it's a slightly different audience, so take the differences with a pinch of salt, but still I think it's really interesting the changes between the two lists. So I'm going to start at the bottom here, and the first game that is absent from this year's list was Damocles. Now in 2008 this made it to number 30, and I was really chuffed about that because Damocles is quite a significant game for me. You know, that kind of idea of the open world, the exploration, it was ahead of its time, you know. And we've got games like Hunter and Elite 2 and Carrier Command on the list this year, which kind of scratched that itch, but still, Damocles went to position 73 in the list this year, so that's a big drop, isn't it, from 30 to 73. But either way, it's still massively ahead of its time. And what I'm thinking, a lot of these games that are absent, it might be because I asked people to vote for 5 games this time, and you know, if you've only got 5 votes, you might not vote for Elite 2 and Damocles, because they might kind of do the same thing for you in your mind, or exist in the same space, so you might end up choosing one of those rather than both. Maybe that's the reason why, or maybe Damocles has just dropped off the radar. I don't know. The next game I noted was Nebulous. Now in 2008 Nebulous was 38th. And you know, in my headspace, it's widely thought of as a classic on the Atari ST. You know, John M. Phillips, he's an absolute legend. But it dropped all the way to 82, from 38 to 82 on this year's list. I was wondering, maybe we're just a bit too old for how difficult this game is now. You know, we're not as patient as we used to be. Time's ticking. And yeah, it is a very difficult game, but just look at it. It's an absolute, it's just beauty, isn't it? It's a gorgeous game. And it's one of those games that, yeah, it's difficult, but if you learn its systems, it does reward it. It does reward your patience. But yeah, don't watch my video of it that's on my channel. This is a bugbear of mine at the moment. It sticks in my craw that when I played my playthrough, I'd completely forgotten that you could jump in the game. There's some bizarre control to jump, isn't there, where do you have to hold the button and press a direction or something? I can't remember. But it's not just a case of pressing up or fire like most games. So I'd completely forgotten there was a jump and therefore couldn't complete the first tower. So yeah, that's an embarrassing video that I need to redo at some point. The next game that's shifted a big jump is Speedball. Now, Speedball was 39th in 2008, and this year it came in at position 100. So, you know, a massive, massive jump there of 61 spaces. And again, is this because I only allowed people to vote for 5 games? So, Speedball fans voted for Speedball 2 and then didn't really want to use another of their 5 votes to vote for another Speedball game. Could be that, couldn't it? Because in other places in this year's list, I've noticed that people tend to go for the original experience more than the sequel. You know, I suppose your first love is often your most passionate, and that may be true of games, but Speedball 2 is really, it's the same game but with a ton more spice added in, and you know, so yeah, there's that. Let's see, what else have we got? Oh, a big drop for this one, and to be honest, I didn't know about this game. I'd never played it, never really heard about it until I did the 2008 survey, and that's Typhoon Thompson. That was 31st in 2008, and that drops all the way down to 152nd. So really, really surprised by such a massive drop. And as I say, I knew nothing about the game in 2008, so it was doing that survey and the resulting list that taught me about this game, because, you know, I needed to do a write-up about it, so I read about it and I played the game a bit. And it's a really, really nice game. It's just so charming. You know, these tiny little sprites that are beautifully animated, loads and loads of charm to it, and the gameplay is really nice as well. It's basically a pseudo 3-dimensional shoot 'em up, but it's great. It's really good. I'd highly recommend it. Next up on the list, I've got Blood Witch. Now, this is another big drop. It's gone from 41st in 2008 way down to 183rd in this year's list, and that's a big, big drop. And I know there are some fans of Blood Witch out there that, you know, if you're a fan of Blood Witch, you love it, because if you spent time to get to know it, it's such a wonderful game. Now, I always kind of saw it as a 2-player dungeon master, but it's not just that. I mean, that is a big part of its appeal, you know, playing dungeon master with a friend. That's great. There aren't many experiences like that out there, but there's so much more to it than that. You know, there's the recruiting mechanic. You pick one character, you know, like in Dungeon Master, you go through the Hall of Champions to make your party. Well, in Blood Witch, you pick your character, and then you wander around and you find the other characters. You know, they're not paintings in the wall that you're resurrecting like in Dungeon Master. This is, you know, you find characters that you like the look of and you ask them to join your party. So that's really cool. And then the way they deal with the archetypes is nice. Like each different kind of style of character are different suits, as in playing card suits. I can't remember which way around it works, but I think the wizards are clubs, if I remember rightly. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, and then each symbol has one of 4 colours, which designates which magic school they are proficient in. So yeah, it just works really, really well. Great game, great game. What else have we got then? So not quite so far down the list this year, but still, it was really high up in 2008. Captive in 2008 made it to 12, you know, knocking on the door of the top 10, which was really impressive. But it dropped again way down to 64 this time, so just out of the top 50. And maybe it's at that 5-vote limit again, you know, and Blood Witch probably is the same thing. People have voted Dungeon Master, and most people who voted Dungeon Master put it at number 1. So then maybe they don't want to use another vote for a similar dungeon crawling game, so Blood Witch and Captive just completely dropped off the list. But, you know, Captive is a great example of the genre too. what I love about Captive is the different context of the game, the setting. You know, you've been wrongly, if I'm remembering correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been wrongly accused of some crime, so they lock you up on a planet, and then you've got to remotely control these droids to go around and do everything for you. If my description of this is vague, there's a reason for that, because I've never really spent time to dive into Captive and play it as much as I should, but I've seen some playthroughs on YouTube and things like that, and it just looks so good. You know, it's got everything that makes Dungeon Master great, but then this cool science fiction setting and this compulsion to, you know, control these droids because you are captive. It's, yeah, really interesting. And another one, this is a really iconic game, and it was positioned in 13th in 2008, which at the time I thought was about right. But again, this one disappeared way down to 74th, and that's Defender of the Crown, which is really surprising, because although I was never a big fan of the game and didn't really play it that much, and it's not a game that I would pick up now. You know, if I was going to boot up my ST, I wouldn't think, oh yeah, fancy a bit of Defender of the Crown. It just doesn't come to my mind in that way. But it's still iconic, and I think that's because it kind of signified that leap into 16-bit. In fact, many shops used to have their STs or Amigas plugged in and running Defender of the Crown to really sell what these machines were capable of in terms of gaming, because, you know, those beautifully drawn graphics, you know, how colourful and well defined everything was, and it just kind of showed off that, yeah, that Spectrum you've got at home is lovely, but check out what this can do. You know, and it's one of those games a bit like Dungeon Master, in fact, or Carrier Command, or what else did we have on the list? Civilization, where there is kind of a deep strategy element to the game, but it presents it in a really accessible way. So it's, you know, you can pick it up and master it a lot quicker than a lot of strategy games that were around at that time. So yeah, really surprising that that's just disappeared out of the consciousness. And it, you know, this kind of thing makes me wonder why is that such a big change? And you kind of think, well, what's been covered? Maybe it's like what's been covered or not in Retro Gamer magazine. You know, that's a magazine that sells a lot, has a big presence in the retro community. Maybe because they're not covering these games, they've just kind of disappeared a little bit. I don't know. There's probably more to it than that, but it's interesting to think about anyway. So those are the games that were like the big fallers, the ones that went from a really high position to disappear off the list completely. But I'd like to move on now to something a bit more personal to me. These are games that I really loved, that I would have almost guaranteed were going to be in the top 50, but then turned out not to be. And they only missed out on it by a bit. But yeah, let's dive in. Now, the first one is Xenon. And Xenon is an interesting one for me to include. It actually came 63rd in the voting. And again, you know, if people have voted for Xenon 2, they might not want to vote for Xenon 1, even if they love it. But I'm including it in this video because I think it is far and away a far superior game to Xenon 2. Xenon 2 came third. According to you guys, the third best Atari ST game, and that just, oh, that sticks in my craw. It really does, because I don't get on with that game at all. And you know, you might have heard me going on about this on the channel before, or I might have weighed in with a reply to your comment like this, but I can't. I feel reluctant to say I can't stand the game. It's not quite that. I mean, it looks stunningly beautiful, Xenon 2. It is one of the best looking games on the ST, and it animates beautifully, and the attention to detail in the visuals is great, you know, and the guy in the shot, and wonderful music. Love the introduction to the game, but the gameplay, I just find it really irritating. It's sluggish and slow and boring for the most part, and then you've got these tiny little zippy enemies that have even smaller hitboxes, that you can be firing a stream of bullets and they just zip through it, which I find that really frustrating. Then there's the fact that they'll just appear out at the bottom of the screen or the side of the screen and career into you and kill you. That's really irritating as well. I feel that these things are ways that they've falsely inflated the difficulty of the game to make it last longer. But the first Xenon doesn't have any of that. It's just a solid shooter. It doesn't look as pretty as Xenon 2, but it's still beautiful for what it does. You know, that kind of Bitmap Brothers metallic sheen is present and correct. But yeah, I don't understand how anyone could prefer to play Xenon 2 to Xenon 1. In fact, what we used to do is load up Xenon 2 to listen to the Bomb the Bass introduction and then turn it off and put Xenon 1 on to play. So yeah, there's that. Xenon was in 63rd. Now, another game that I absolutely adored, but just missed out in 62nd place, was SimCity. I'm really quite surprised this one didn't make it, because there's the strategy games that did make the list. Like I've said earlier, they're the games that make the strategy really accessible. So yeah, there's deep strategy there. Yes, there's lots to keep you occupied for a long time, like in Civilization and Populous and so on. But you know, it's just, you can boot it up and just play the game. It's that accessible, and SimCity is the absolute epitome of that for me. You know, the icon-driven interface. You know, you can just be plonking buildings down. You know they need power, and you know people need transport from their homes to these industrial factories. It all makes sense, and it's all easy to get into. And then, of course, the depth comes later because you've got to manage the economy and so on and so on. I just think it's an absolutely delicious game, you know. And the fact that when I was 8, I could play it and enjoy it, and now that I'm 40, I can play it and enjoy it, I think speaks volumes really about that accessibility. You know, they really achieved something good with that game. Okay, next one, really big surprise that this isn't in the list again, Elite. That came in at 58th, and again, it's the sequelitis. It might be the fact that people voted for Frontier, so didn't want to use another vote for Elite. I can understand that. Also, the ST isn't really the system you automatically associate with Elite. I think I'd be fair in saying that most people would tend to think of the BBC Micro. I played it first on the Acorn Electron, so that's what you know, that black and white slideshow that is the Electron version. That's what I picture in my head when I think of the first Elite, and I think maybe other people are the same. But having said that, the ST got a cracking version of Elite with really nice filled 3D vector graphics that animate really smoothly. And there's some nice additions like the icons on the stock market and things like that. So, you know, if you have played Elite on the BBC or the Electron like me, or any other system, and you've got an ST, give the ST version a go. It's definitely worth a crack. Another one, Bucky Boy. Again, I couldn't believe this didn't make the list. It was in the 2008 list. I can't remember where exactly it came. Quite low down, I think. But it is such a brilliant. I mean, good arcade conversions, like really properly good and solid ones, are like hen's teeth on the ST sometimes. And this is just a great conversion, and a bit like Super Sprint in that Super Sprint, you know, it had the spinning steering wheels and the pedals and the high resolution screen, and that should have been really difficult to convert to the ST, but they did a brilliant job. And it's similar with Bucky Boy, you know, because that had a steering wheel. I can't really remember now, but you know, the gear sticks, and it had that massive was it 3 monitors in a row? 3 or, yeah, it would have been 3, I think. But anyway, it produced this huge widescreen picture which really made the arcade and made it stand out from the crowd. So you think that's not really going to work in a home conversion, but they did a brilliant job on the ST. I mean, it's like it's playing a Saturday morning cartoon. You know, it's colourful, it's brash, it's fun. Yeah, great game. So yeah, I was gutted that didn't make it into the list. But the biggest one my biggest disappointment. Now, I take that with a pinch of salt. I'm not massively disappointed. This is your list that you voted for. The games that are there deserve to be there, no questions asked. But still, when I saw that it wasn't in the top 50, I felt a little bit sad. The fact that there's no Championship Manager at all. It was, I mean, it was so close. 52nd, just behind Cadaver. But I lost so much time to Championship Manager, and Championship Manager is in my top 5. Probably my 4th favourite Atari ST game. I'm talking specifically about the 93 edition. People who voted for Championship Manager actually voted for the 93-94 edition, which is the one that came out the year after. But yeah, I just lost so many hours to this game. So many hours. And it's probably the ST game that I've played the most. And that's because, you know, I would play it for hours and hours on my own. But I also had a save game on the go with my best friend. And I also had a save game on the go with my uncle. So anytime my best mate visited, we'd play it. Anytime he visited, we'd play it. So I'd have, you know, constantly have 3 saved games on the go. And my own personal save game, I would join a club in it would have been the 3rd division in that game. 3rd division, get them to promotion, get them to win the Premiership, maybe even win the European Cup, and then leave and start again. Come back down to the 3rd division again and send somebody else all the way up, and I'd keep doing that. And I did it over and over and over and over. Yeah, joyous times. Really happy memories of that game. The memories that the memory that really sticks out is how much my uncle loved that game, and he had, I mean, I spent hours playing it, but he had a patience for that game beyond anything. In fact, he used to come over for Christmas. He'd stay Christmas Eve, and then we'd wake up Christmas Day together. And one Christmas, we started playing it Christmas Eve. I went to bed, excited to wake up in the morning and get presents. He didn't actually go to bed. He just played all night, playing Championship Manager. But that was him all over. Yeah, great times. What a wonderful game. In fact, this is making me want to play it right now. So I might start a new save. Yeah, so anyway, those are the games that I feel are missing from the list. And also the games that I thought were interesting, how different it was from 2008 to 2020. But I'd like to hear what you think. What do you think the snubs are? What should be on the list that isn't? What was surprising to you? Or is there a game you particularly love that isn't on the list? I'd particularly like to hear that, actually, because my next video is probably going to be a hidden gems video. So I'm going to try and highlight some games that deserve to be on the top 50 because they're brilliant, but I know they would never make it to the top 50 because they didn't sell very much back in the day, or they were a homebrew game, or I don't know, I don't know, you know what I mean. And I just want to recommend you some games that I think are brilliant, basically. So if you've got any games that you think should absolutely be in that top 50 but aren't, then let me know. Except for Kev, you can keep your international karate. That doesn't belong anywhere near this top 50 and you know it. Anyway, I hope you really enjoyed that video, guys. It's lovely to talk to you. And don't forget, please dive into the comment section below. Genuinely, one of my favourite things about making these videos is hearing what kind of memories you've had stirred by them and hearing your opinions on the games. If you vehemently disagree with what I've said, please do. If you're the biggest Xenon 2 fan, because I know there's a lot of you Xenon 2 fans out there, please disagree with me in the comments. Tell me why it's a brilliant game. Tell me why it's better than Xenon, because I need an education there, because I just don't get it. I don't get it. Anyway, thank you ever so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. See you soon.